David Quinn is back with the New York Rangers. Uh-oh.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blueshirts fans, to episode number 1330 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, Jon Chik. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we got some breaking news as of this recording that the Rangers have indeed rounded out Mike Sullivan's coaching staff. They announced the hiring of 3 assistant coaches. That would be former New York Rangers head coach David Quinn, Joe Sacco, and Ty Hennes. And we're going to go ahead and talk about all 3 of those coaches individually in today's episode. We're going to start with David Quinn. But first, a quick PSA. This is one of several episodes that are going to be releasing, auto-publishing while I'm away on vacation. And, even though news broke of this a couple of days ago, these are my thoughts on the Rangers hiring these 3 individuals to be the assistant coaches. To begin with, something that'll kind of catch your attention right away and certainly caught the attention of a lot of Ranger fans is that the Raiders, are going very Boston U heavy here. You've got Sullivan, Sacco, Quinn, and even Chris Drury with ties to Boston University. And then, of course, Ty Hennes with ties to Boston College. I don't really know what to make of that, but just kind of an interesting little tidbit as far as the current New York Ranger brass is concerned. But we'll get to Quinn in just a second. We were all kind of wondering for a while there what exactly was taking so long, what the holdup might be as it pertains to Mike Sullivan picking his assistant coaches. And then in the span of about 24 hours, we got news that Dan Muse was in heavy consideration to become the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins. And then there was the news that he had become the next head coach of the Penguins. And then there was the news that the Rangers hired not 1, not 2, but 3 assistant coaches to round out Mike Sullivan's staff. And we also kind of speculated in the Dan Muse is leaving episode of Locked On New York Rangers if maybe part of the reason for the holdup here was the Rangers wanted to see if Muse could be talked into staying as assistant coach, But Muse did what I think a lot of assistant coaches would do. Most of them want to be head coaches. He got the chance to do exactly that, and he jumped at it, and I certainly don't begrudge him for that. But then within 24 hours, right away, the Rangers moved on their guys, and they now have rounded out Mike Sullivan's coaching staff. And like I said, we'll start with David Quinn. Most of you know the story with Quinn, or at least the New York Ranger chapters of David Quinn's story. But to go through the entire track record here, strong college track record as a head coach for Quinn, 5 seasons at Boston University from 2013-14 to 2017-18. His teams in those seasons combined went 105, 69, and 21, or I guess that would be 105 and 90 if we were to combine all the losses together. And in his second season, this is probably his best season as head coach there, they made it to the national title game and unfortunately lost to Providence 4-3. But then he moves on. He's the next head coach of the New York Rangers. It's one of the only times in recent history where the Rangers really thought outside the box a little bit when it came to their next head coach. They've been playing it very safe other than that. Not that there's anything terribly wrong with that, but they haven't really been bold when it comes to hiring a new head coach. Sullivan, Gerard Gallant, Peter Laviolette, John Tortorella, if you want to go back that far, Alain Vigneault. These are all guys that have been around the NHL and were kind of the obvious hires at the time. And Quinn was the one that was a little bit bold when the Rangers made that decision. And then he comes to the Rangers during the rebuild, right in the throes of the rebuild, and spends 3 seasons here, 96 wins, 87 losses, 25 overtime losses. So that'd be 96 at 112. We combine all the losses together. And then he was fired. The writing was really on the wall after the Rangers decided to move on from Jeff Gorton and JD. Quinn was going to be next. They let him finish out that third and final season, but the writing was certainly on the wall that they were going to be going in another direction the next season. And that's when they hired Gerard Gallant. But Quinn moved right along, went to the Sharks, 2 seasons there, 41, 98, and 25. It's a brutal record. To be completely fair here, though, I don't know if there's a coach in NHL history that could have won and won consistently with the Sharks. Maybe there's certain guys that could have done a little bit better than that, but they are in a massive rebuild that's going to take some time and obviously has taken some time. And Quinn was kind of in a situation there where, again, I just don't know how much better that many other people could have possibly done in that situation. And then, of course, 1 year with the Penguins under Sullivan as an assistant coach. The record of the Penguins last year, 34, 36, and 12. One positive from Quinn's tenure, his 1 year stay with the Penguins, he oversaw the Penguins power play unit. And despite the Penguins, just being a not so good team, if we're being completely honest here, and despite them having a rough season, they did finish 6th in power play efficiency at 25.8%, whereas the Rangers finished 28th at 17.6%. And I'm going to elaborate on Quinn and his duties in just a little bit here, but I think there's a question that's on the mind of a lot of Ranger fans that obviously remember him from his first tenure, which was not that long ago. There's only 4 seasons that have passed since David Quinn was last the head coach of the New York Rangers. And the question is, could this be kind of an awkward situation? And I think there's a chance that it could. I think sooner or later it'll be water under the bridge. But, when you think back to Quinn's coaching tenure with the Rangers, obviously it didn't go that great. And I know they were rebuilding and everything. But what was notable to me was there didn't seem to be too many Ranger players at the end of the season, Quinn's 3rd season, that really went to bat for Quinn. There were even a couple that maybe took some subtle parting shots at David Quinn. There was this feeling and belief among players that he was way too much of a micromanager. And if the Rangers had a day off, he had to know exactly what everybody was doing. And you can understand that to some degree. He wants to be a hands-on coach, but at the same time, these are grown men. These are adults. They should be able to behave themselves and handle themselves in a way that's appropriate whenever the Rangers might have a day off. So, mixed feelings, I think, from the Ranger players, and I think mixed feelings at best when it comes to the Ranger fans as it pertains to Quinn's first go-around with this team as the head coach. Fans didn't really seem to love him all that much. When he came back as the head coach of the Sharks, he was booed, pretty loudly during that time. Per a recent article from Vince Mercogliano, though, it does sound like David Quinn, for what it's worth, has maintained something of a relationship with some of his former New York Ranger players over the years. It sounds like he's at least somewhat stayed in touch with them. And a lot of those guys are still here. Only 4 seasons have gone by. For better or worse, there will be some familiarity between David Quinn and some of these long-tenured New York Ranger players. So hopefully it's not too awkward. The other thing that's a little bit odd about this, I don't know if I would necessarily call it awkward, but kind of just a quirk, I guess you could say. I don't know how many times this has happened. How many times in NHL history have you had a situation where somebody spends multiple seasons as your head coach and then is back just, 5 seasons later, 5 years later as an assistant coach? It hasn't happened all that often. And again, I don't have a number on that. It'd be not the easiest thing to find out for sure, find out a definitive number there, but a little bit odd there for sure. And I think to, again, address some of the concerns that Ranger fans have when it comes to David Quinn, one of the biggest issues that I think a lot of us Ranger fans had with Quinn during his first go-around was him not playing the kids, was him not giving a lot of opportunities to young players on this Ranger roster. It was a ridiculously young roster, the youngest in the NHL. And to be fair to Quinn, other Ranger coaches have come under fire for the exact same thing, most notably and most recently, Gerard Gallant and Peter Laviolette. And I feel like all NHL coaches do this to a degree. There's times where they defer to this veteran or that veteran or whatever it might be. But I think it was at its worst when David Quinn was the coach, for the very simple reason that at that time, the Rangers were truly, truly rebuilding. Again, youngest roster in the NHL when David Quinn took over. It felt like everybody out there was like 23 or younger. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get the idea. And he would still defer to veterans, and veterans that weren't really even that great anyway. You've got guys like Phil DiGiuseppe playing with Artemi Panarin and playing in the top 6 instead of, or Alexi Lafreniere or Capo Caco. So I think that kind of drove Ranger fans crazy. And it continued with Gallant and with Laviolette to be fair here. But at least with those two, you could argue, well, the team was really good. They were contending. So developing young players at that point wasn't necessarily the biggest priority. It should have been the priority when David Quinn was here. And what makes it so disappointing, I think, for a lot of Ranger fans is that was sort of his calling card, right? He's coming from the college ranks, 5 successful seasons in the NCAA, and obviously used to working with young players, developing young players, helping them find the top of their game. And for one reason or another, it just never felt like it was that big of a priority for Quinn when he was the head coach of the New York Rangers. So I think that's where some of the issues, probably most of the issues that Ranger fans have with Quinn tend to stem from. One thing I will say, there's something that Quinn can do, and I hinted at it just a second ago, but there's something Quinn can do to potentially get Ranger fans off his back this time around. Surefire way to win the fans over, and that is to fix the Ranger power play. I mentioned the success he had with the power play during his one season in Pittsburgh. He oversaw that unit. The Ranger power play, I mean, it wasn't just the power play. It was really the whole team. But the power play specifically, by the end of last season, looked completely broken, shattered. What was the run they went on? 2 for 43 or whatever it was. And they were every bit as bad as that ratio. They weren't hitting the post. They weren't getting unlucky. They weren't being robbed by the goalie all that often. They were just that bad. They were 2 for 43 bad, just absolutely atrocious. And they never fixed anything. They never changed anything. Same personnel, same system, et cetera, et cetera. But it got me to thinking back to how the Ranger power play fared during Quinn's first go around as the head coach of this team. And it was actually a little bit better than I think some people might remember. In Quinn's 3 years combined, if we take all 3 seasons that he was the head coach of the Rangers and we combine them together and we look at it against the rest of the teams in the NHL, the Rangers were 13th in those 3 seasons combined with a success rate of 21%. So they were not what you would call an elite unit, but they were beginning to put things together. And if you watch the Ranger power play over the last handful of seasons, nothing has really changed. I mean, you begin with the personnel. It's basically always been Kreider, Fox, Mika, and Panarin. And when it was working, I mean, hey, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But this last season, the power play was terrible. And those 4 more or less stayed on that same top power play unit for pretty much the entire season. Other than that, you know, as far as the system, it's very similar. But I feel like we've gotten to the point where the Rangers have been running the same power play for so long and with the same players for so long that the NHL has kind of caught up to what they're doing and they're able to better defend it. And the power play just isn't as effective. And the power play fell apart this past season, bottom 5 in the league. So maybe Quinn can come in here, try some different things, whether that's different personnel, maybe that's just like a different approach, a different priority that the Rangers have on the power play. Something has to change. This power play feels like it desperately needs a touch-up, a revamp, call it whatever you want to call it. But maybe David Quinn in a perfect world can oversee that project and get the Rangers power play back to where it needs to be. Because as much as these guys struggled last year on the power play and otherwise, there are too many skilled players on the Rangers for them to finish bottom 5 in the league. I mean, at worst, this should be like a league-wide average unit, and I would think probably even a little bit better than average. And if David Quinn can help the Rangers in that area, then he'll win over at least some Ranger fans. One other reason why I think, however you feel about David Quinn, I think there's a reason for all of us to like this hire. And again, it's not, I don't love the Quinn hiring. I don't hate it. Bottom line, everything is going to fall on Mike Sullivan. How this team performs and all that, and his coaches for, his choices for assistant coach, that's all going to be determined by what the Rangers do on the ice. The buck stops with Mike Sullivan. So if Quinn is Sullivan's guy, it's fine with me. I'm not going to go crazy about it. But I will say there is one reason why I think everybody should like this hire. Even if you couldn't stand David Quinn and you really don't want him back, this sends a message to the players. And that message is quite simply that you are not in control here. You don't get to make these decisions. The front office is in charge of these things. And the bottom line is that you don't get a say in these decisions. We had Mika Zibanejad at the end of this past season talking about how, like, oh, we need to have better communication. No, if that's Mika's biggest concern after this past season, then I think he needs to look in the mirror a little bit. But bottom line, the message is sent to the players. You don't get to make these decisions. We make these decisions. Because certain players didn't seem to be all that high on David Quinn, but that's neither here nor there. He is back as an assistant coach, regardless of what certain players, not all of them, but certain Rangers that played under David Quinn might feel about it. So that's where things stand. In just a second, we're going to shift our attention to Joe Sacco and why he might be a good choice to oversee the penalty kill unit for the Rangers. We'll get to that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute. To let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1-ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they are packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It is the perfect clutch grab-and-go snack, regardless of whatever I might be doing that day. And the satisfying crunch of opening each shell is just like snack meditation. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works just as hard as you do. Get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out to the everydayers as always. I believe our next episode, not 100%, but I think it's going to be our mock draft episode where I basically just act as the Ranger GM and make all the picks through a draft simulator and talk about why I like this player in the first round, that player in the third round, this player in the seventh round, whatever it might be. Definitely looking forward to that. But for right now, let's keep the focus on the Ranger assistant coaches, and we're going to shift our attention from David Quinn to Joe Sacco. Now, Sacco, interim coach for the Bruins for the final 60 games of this past season after being an assistant there for parts of 11 seasons and with two different head coaches during that time. So he's a Boston Bruins mainstay for sure. Quick note here. I do want to throw this out there because I hinted at it in the last section, but I don't know if I outright stated this. The Rangers said when these coaches were hired to their assistant coaching positions that they are going to be figuring out roles for everybody in the upcoming days and weeks. And that does seem a little bit odd to me. You're like, let's just hire these three guys and we'll figure out what they do later. I like the idea of bringing different coaches with, a certain plan in place. That just sounds better than the alternative. Not that you can't do it this way if you're the Rangers, not that it's like that big of a deal, but I would have liked the idea of like, okay, here's what we envision Quinn doing. Here's what we envision Sacco doing. Here's what we envision Hennes doing. And it doesn't sound like that's the case at all, but they'll figure that out in the days and weeks to come, and we'll obviously keep an eye on that. But to put the attention on Sacco here, he did play in the NHL. He's now 56 years old. He was drafted 71st overall by the Leafs all the way back in 1987, ended up playing for the Leafs, the Ducks, the Islanders, the Caps, and the Flyers before retiring after the 2002-2003 season. 738 games, 94 goals, 119 assists. He also played for the U.S. in the World Championships 7 times and played in the 1992 Olympics for the United States as well. But as far as his coaching background is concerned, he was previously a head coach with the Colorado Avalanche for 4 seasons from 2009 to 2013. He posted a record of 130 wins, 134 losses, and 30 overtime losses, or 130 and 164 if we want to combine all those losses together. He also made the playoffs in his first year with the Colorado Avalanche, lost in 6 games to the Sharks, and was actually a Jack Adams finalist that season. Unfortunately, he couldn't sustain the success. They missed the playoffs the next 3 years after that. And then, like I said, assistant coach with the Bruins for 11 straight seasons, including a good bunch of them with Jim Montgomery, who was fired this past season. Sacco takes over as the interim coach, goes 24, 30, and 6. Although, it's kind of like Quinn with the Sharks. Not quite as dire of a situation, I don't think, but it was going to be very, very difficult for I think, anybody to turn that team around this season. They're older, they're dealing with some injuries, and they obviously traded away a good amount of players at the trade deadline. But it sounds like most Boston beat reporters, from what I was reading earlier today, agreed that the team did continue to at least play hard under Sacco. And it just was a matter of they're just not that good. And obviously they didn't win a lot of games. But Sacco also 2 seasons as a head coach for the AHL's Lake Erie Monsters, 1 season as an assistant coach with the Buffalo Sabres. That was before he joined the Bruins. And I think that pretty much covers it as far as all his different stops. But the Bruins, obviously, his most notable stop. His first season was back there with the Bruins in 2014, 2015. They missed the playoffs in his first 2 years, but then they made the playoffs for 8 consecutive seasons after that. And then this past season, started as an assistant coach, became the interim head coach once Montgomery was fired, and didn't make the playoffs that year either. In that 8-year span where the Bruins made the playoffs for 8 straight seasons, they only once got past the second round. That was in 2019 when they lost in the finals to the Blues in 7 games. So he came close to winning a Stanley Cup as an assistant coach. So not too many deep playoff runs while he was there for the Bruins, but a consistently very good team, and a team that was, toward the top of the standings most years. And like I said, basically always in the playoffs, 8 straight seasons making the playoffs for the Bruins during his tenure. And this was interesting as well to me. It sounds like one of his biggest duties as a member of the Bruins coaching staff was to oversee the penalty kill unit. And that kind of got me thinking that maybe he ends up taking on that role with the Rangers. And I wanted to see, the total body of work. Again, I guess 10 and a half seasons, we could say, as an assistant coach, because of course he became the interim head coach this past season, but parts of 11 different seasons as an assistant coach. So I found out that he oversaw the PK unit, wanted to look back at the full body of work, see how he did there. I looked at those 11 seasons combined, the Bruins against every other team in the NHL, and the results are very good. In that span, the Bruins had that 11-year span, the Bruins had the second best penalty kill unit in the NHL with a success rate of 82.8%, and only the Canes were better. So that's an elite unit. And again, one of his primary duties was to oversee the PK. And, the past season for the Rangers, they were 11th in the league in penalty kill at 80.3%, which obviously doesn't sound too bad. But you got to remember, that unit was basically in shambles at the end of the season. It didn't really grab a lot of headlines because there were so many other issues and the power play was so atrocious. But the Ranger penalty kill really struggled down the stretch. And somebody is going to need to fix that unit as well. And obviously hope Sacco can be that guy if that indeed ends up becoming, one of his duties with this team going forward. But we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. We got one more assistant coach to discuss today, and that's going to be Ty Hennes. We will get to him in just a minute. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers by talking about the third and final assistant coach that was hired by Mike Sullivan and the front office, and that would, of course, be Ty Hennes, who spent 3 seasons as an assistant coach with Mike Sullivan, the last 3 seasons with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and for 4 years before that, he was the skills and skating coach with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And let me also say, and I've talked about this in the search for assistant coaches, I like the idea of the head coach of your team, whether it's Mike Sullivan or anybody else, whether it's the New York Rangers or any other team. I've always said this. I like the idea of the head coach being able to pick his guys, to pick his assistant coaches. And it sounds like the Rangers afforded Mike Sullivan the chance to do exactly that. That's why, again, I'm not losing my mind too much on the fact that David Quinn is back. He wouldn't have been my top choice, but you got to let your coach cook, as the kids would say. And he's got to have that right to fill out his coaching staff any way that he sees fit. And obviously there's a lot of familiarity with Ty Hennes. Again, 3 years as an assistant coach, 4 years before that as the skills and skating coach. So 7 years that Hennes spent under Mike Sullivan with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that Sullivan would reach out to Hennes, bring him in as an assistant coach with the New York Rangers. But as far as Hennes and his background, 45 years old, he is the least experienced coach on the staff, but that might not be the worst thing. I don't think it's such a bad idea to have, guys of different backgrounds and have maybe somebody that's a little bit more new school in the room, so to speak, have at least one somewhat young coach on the coaching staff. I don't mind that dynamic at all. As far as Hennes and his playing background is concerned, he played 4 seasons at Boston College. He was an alternate captain as a senior. They won a national championship in his rookie season. Well, I guess it technically was his rookie season, but more commonly known as a freshman season when it comes to the college ranks. And they won a national championship then. He then went on to play 3 seasons in the ECHL, 3 seasons in the CHL, and last played in 2007, 2008 in the CHL. As far as his history with the Penguins, we already kind of got into it. 7 seasons there combined. I got to say, I like the idea that he's got a skills background. And I don't know if he's going to be in that role here. Obviously, the Rangers still have their own skills coach and Christian Hamura, who remains from the previous regime. But the Rangers have really come under fire for their player development or lack thereof. There's a lot of Ranger fans that have taken aim at guys like Jed Ortmeyer, guys like Tanner Glass, and maybe even Christian Hamura a little bit too. Maybe Hennes can help there a little bit. Now, on one hand, if you look at the recent Penguins run, they don't seem to be developing too many young players in recent seasons. I don't know how much of that exactly falls on Hennes, but in complete fairness to Hennes or anybody else that's in charge of developing the Penguins players, there's not a lot of highly thought of prospects to develop over the last handful of seasons. On the other hand, though, if you're in charge of developing players, then you got to do just that. Even if you don't have this can't miss slam dunk prospect, you got to figure out a way to get the most out of guys that are maybe a little bit more unheralded. And it doesn't seem like he's really been able to do that. If you look at the recent track record, he doesn't have that shining student, so to speak, right? You could point to certain players on the Penguins that were there and on the way up when Hennes was there. You've got Jake Gensel, you've got Brian Rust, you've got Jason Zucker, all, accomplished players in the NHL for sure. But with those 3, I feel like they were all kind of coming into their own before Hennes got there, before he took over as the skating and skills coach. Maybe he helped them along the way, but they were already blossoming into, strong NHL players at that time. So he doesn't really have a sparkling track record, at least that I can see in that department. But look, bottom line, the Rangers, no matter who does it, they're going to need to get certain young players to that next level. In the case of Alexis Lafreniere, you got to get him back on track. If Keandre Miller is back next season, you got to get him back on track. And then you've got this whole new wave of young Ranger players that's along the way here, guys that have already made their NHL debut. I've been kind of referring to them as the big three: Brian Hoffman, Gabe Perreault, Brett Berard. You'll have some young defensemen like EJ Emery and Drew Fortescue along the way as well. Is Hennes going to help in that area? Is he going to help develop them? I mean, in a way, I think like every coach is at least somewhat responsible for the development of the players. So hopefully he can excel in that area. We'll see how it goes. But I think if you're Hennes and you really want to impress Ranger fans, then let's see guys like Hoffman, guys like Perreault, guys like Berard grow by leaps and bounds this upcoming season. I think some of that might fall on Hennes in a positive way. And as far as Hennes is concerned, I figure I could go ahead and leave you guys with a couple of quotes on him. This one came from Mike Sullivan himself. This is an older quote from at least a year or two ago, but this is what he had to say about Hennes. He's a chiropractor and happens to love hockey, so he decided to become a skills coach. But when you think in those terms, he has a real good understanding of biology and how everything functions, whether it be your neuromuscular capacity or the brain's importance in motor skill development. I've yet to be around a skills coach that has a grasp of it as well as Ty does. And then we also had this from Matt Venzel. He's a Penguins writer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And not too many years ago, he wrote an article about Hennes. It's an interesting article. I definitely recommend, checking it out and reading it if you have time. But he tweeted out that article and included along with the article, he wrote, "Super sharp guy with a unique backstory and endless energy and positivity." Endless energy and positivity sounds like a welcome change for this Ranger team for me, because if you watch this team last year, not much energy at all, let alone endless energy. And what was there to be positive about? From pretty much, I would say, like November onward. Little spurts where they were playing better here and there, of course, but this was not an overly enthusiastic, energetic, positive place to be last season, the Ranger locker room. And the only other thing I'll say about the coaching staffs here is I think most people are aware of this, but it's worth pointing out now. Goalie coach Jeff Malcolm is back from last season. So too is skills coach Christian Hamora. They will continue in their roles. So the coaching staff is set, onward and upward. I mean, I don't love really any of these hires, but I don't really hate any of them either. The bottom line, again, the buck stops with Mike Sullivan. Whatever the Rangers do, however they perform, it's going to fall on Mike Sullivan. If they're great next season and they're back in contendership, we're all going to love what Mike Sullivan is bringing to the table. We're all going to love these hires that he came up with here, or at least most Ranger fans will. If the Rangers look like a train wreck next season, then that's going to fall on Mike Sullivan, as will his choices for assistant coaches. So I'm kind of in wait and see mode. Again, don't love any of these options. Don't really dislike any of them either. The story's yet to be written, and we're going to be here for it. So definitely looking forward to that. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchik17. Once again, that is @jchik17. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.